Então seguiremos o debate com um keynote speech que nos guiará pelas tendências do futuro da tributação no mundo, e para ele convido a juntarem-se a mim e ao Ministro Gilmar Mendes, Teresa Ter-Minassian, do BID ex-FMI. Uma salva de palmas. E também a doutora Helena Borges, por favor, para se juntarem a nós. Uma salva de palmas.
Temos agora esse painel, como keynote speaker, a professora Teresa Ter-Minassian, tendências do futuro da tributação no mundo. E a professora Helena Borges fará alguns comentários. Nós agradecemos imensamente a presença da professora Teresa Ter-Minassian. Ainda ontem, eu acho que eu lia num jornal português referências à sua atuação no Brasil, naquela época do FMI, né, que já se falou, e ela fazia, inclusive, referências otimistas, relativamente elogiosas ao estado fiscal do Brasil hoje, vis-à-vis a experiência anterior. É uma conhecida de todos nós e tem também estado aqui no FIBE contribuindo para esses debates extremamente relevantes em termos do contexto internacional. E hoje ela se encontra no BID e certamente vai nos falar algo de bastante relevante sobre tendências do futuro da tributação no mundo. Com a palavra, a professora Teresa. A professora vai falar em inglês, embora fale português fluentemente, mas ela vai falar em inglês por conta da maior precisão da terminologia técnica.
Obrigada, ministro Gilmar. Bom dia, doutora. Sim. Aqui está. É verdadeiramente um grande prazer para mim estar aqui neste segundo Fórum da Tributação. Eu estive no fórum anterior, no primeiro ano do FIBE, mas era mais sobre assuntos de governança fiscal e federalismo fiscal. Eu vou fazer a minha apresentação em inglês, porque é mais fácil para mim falar de assuntos técnicos, ou mais ou menos técnicos, em inglês que em português. Mas então, agradeço muito ao FIBE ter arrumado essa interpretação simultânea para mim. Podem pôr a apresentação. Antes de começar, before I start with the substance of my presentation, I would like to make a couple of general remarks. First of all, I'm conscious that I am with an audience of experts who have hands-on expertise in tax policy and tax administration. This has not been my area of particular expertise. I am more a macro-fiscal economist and specialist on decentralization issues. But I decided to accept this invitation to talk about trends in the taxation worldwide, because I wanted to learn and I wanted to participate in the subsequent panels and really learn from the experts. So take my sort of presentation as what I would call a curtain raiser, an overview of the issues that are going to be debated with much greater detail in the subsequent panels. Okay. I also would like to say that I will focus more on the aspects of tax policy than tax administration, because I really have had no hands-on experience with tax administration in my various, previous jobs and capacities. So, it's not showing here the presentation. If not, then I will stand and, okay, and I will talk from here. My presentation will start with sort of a very brief overview of current trends in global public finances, and then focus on the challenges that the global trends pose for taxation. Challenges from the international mobility of capital, challenges from the digital revolution, and challenges from changes in the labor market. Why is this? Okay. So, I'm sorry, but this is not working very well. Okay. So, no. I have to go first. Okay. The public finance situation worldwide is a very difficult one. The levels of the gross public debt, this chart shows gross public debt of the general government, were, of course, very much increased during the COVID as a result of the various packages of support of the population affected by the COVID. But, although there was a little decline, now the decline is stopped. And basically, for the industrial countries, that remains on average. These are average levels. The blue ones being for industrial countries, the orange one for the emerging market, and the green one for low-income countries. The levels of debt for the industrial countries are over 100% of GDP, and those for emerging markets are lower, but still of the order, above 60%, well above 60% of GDP, and rising again. So there is not much scope for financing the growing expenditure needs with additional deficits. Okay. The spending needs are rising for a number of reasons. Of course, aging populations, the need to adapt and mitigate climate change, the need to continue reducing poverty, which rose again during the COVID. Of course, the geopolitical tensions that we are all witnessing, and the related increase in defense spending. I don't need to say this here in Europe. And then the investments needed in digital and other infrastructure. In the face of high public debt and growing spending needs, there is a need for additional revenue mobilization. I'm not saying that all the burden of the adjustment has to come on the revenue side. It depends the blend between, there is first of all substantial scope for improvements in the efficiency and prioritization of public spending, more in some countries than others. So the mix of spending and revenue measures will be naturally country-specific, the appropriate mix. Nevertheless, generally speaking, there is a need to increase, to raise additional revenue. And unfortunately, the global trends create substantial headwinds against this mobilization of revenues. And as I said, I will discuss the challenges coming from the increased international mobility of capital, from inadequate capacity of many tax administration to enforce the taxation of digital transactions, from the digital innovation, especially the diffusion of crypto assets, and finally the diffusion of artificial intelligence that threatens over the medium term the base of traditional labor taxation. The intensification of international capital mobility in recent decades has been a major contributor to the downward pressure on statutory rates of the corporate income tax. This can be seen, excuse me. No. It's so difficult. This doesn't work very well. Yes, you can see here from this chart the decline in statutory rates of the corporate income tax, but also, importantly, from the this doesn't, okay, no. How do I go back? Okay. Sorry. Can someone explain how do I move back on this? Okay. Yes, okay. From the proliferation of tax expenditures under the corporate income tax, the increased use of profit shifting mechanisms, for instance, transfer pricing, and other instruments of tax avoidance. And finally, the use of tax havens to evade actually corporate and personal income taxes. Dealing effectively with such erosion of income taxes requires international cooperation, but this is unfortunately difficult to achieve in the current geopolitical environment, as we all are unfortunately too aware. In recent decades, the OECD and other international organizations have spearheaded the efforts to combat the erosion of income taxes. And these include the milestones in this effort have been the initiative to combat base erosion and profit shifting, the BEPS, which you are all, I'm sure, in this well familiar. And then the OECD G20-led inclusive framework, which consists of the two pillars. The pillar one aimed to address the tax implication of the disassociation between the country of residence of the multinational enterprises and the countries in which most of their profits are generated. And pillar two that aims at preventing a race to the bottom in the corporate income taxation worldwide. Pillar one applies to the multinational enterprises with a global turnover of over 20 billion euros and recommends the allocation of 25% of their profit in excess of 10% of their global revenues to the market jurisdiction in which the sales occurred. Now, the threshold is quite high, 20 billion euro, and so this means that the pillar one would apply to only some 2% of the global corporate tax base. The pillar one was primarily motivated by the desire to revert the worldwide proliferation of the taxes on digital services, which are taxes that are distortive because they single out only one sector of the digital economy. They are based on gross revenues rather than net profits, and also their unilateral imposition by one country or other increases the risks of retaliation and of double taxation. Also, these of course, affect mainly US-based multinational enterprises, which are the main sellers of these digital services. And so they have been strongly opposed by the various US administration. And this opposition has led Canada, for instance, recently to rescind the implementation. The Pillar 2 recommends the adoption of a tax with corporate tax with a minimum effective rate of 15% for corporations with a global turnover in excess of 750 million euros. This does not, the Pillar 2 does not require countries to adopt the tax, but to respect its adoption by other countries, including the levying of the top-up tax on multinational enterprises subject to an effective rate lower than the global minimum tax. And the IMF staff estimated a couple of years ago that the implementation of this Pillar 2 could raise significant additional revenue between 5 and 8% at the global level, but with the distribution, of course, depending on individual countries' condition. Sorry. So how much progress has been made so far? Well, under the BEPS action, there have been significant improvements. First of all, several countries have adopted now the streamlined OECD guidelines on transfer pricing. More than 110 jurisdictions have begun the automatic exchanges of information. At least 135 billion are estimated, the additional revenues are estimated to have been identified as a result of this BEPS action. The voluntary disclosure programs have yielded some nearly 100 billion additional revenue worldwide. And also various studies suggested a reduction in offshore outright tax evasion. The number of and the amounts of offshore deposits seem to have been declining. But significant challenges remain, especially strengthening the timeliness, the quality, and the utilization of the exchanges of information among the tax administration. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the subsequent panel. Under the inclusive framework, the no consensus has been reached so far on the implementation of the Pillar 1. On Pillar 2, more than 55 jurisdictions have already implemented or are planning to implement the global minimum tax rules or a domestic minimum top-up tax. And some more are taking steps already in this direction. So there is, but of course, as you will see now, there is one very important missing actor. Okay. The US is, of course, an important exception. Even before the tax reforms that have been introduced in last July with the One Beautiful Budget Act of the US, the corporate income tax in the US was not fully aligned with the global minimum tax rules. However, the effective rate was broadly in line with the 15% minimum. But now the Beautiful Budget Act has strengthened the tax incentives for multinational enterprises to base themselves in the US, and this has reduced the effective corporate income tax rate to around 14%, which potentially subjects US-based multinational enterprises to top up taxes in other jurisdictions. Naturally, this is not very much welcomed by the US authorities, and the US Congress was threatening to retaliate with a so-called revenge tax on foreign corporations operating in the US. In the G7, an agreement was reached to dropping the revenge tax but exempting the US multinational enterprises from the top-up tax. So this gives you a little bit of a sort of general overview of the challenges regarding corporate income tax. There are extensive discussions about the possibility of a minimum income tax for individuals. I'm sure this will be covered by the next panel in more details. The US already has an alternative minimum tax for higher income recipients, but this is not to combat international evasion, but rather to limit the erosion of the tax base through the use of deductions. And this alternative minimum tax is calculated at the rate of 26 or 28% on an alternative adjusted income, gross income base that disallows certain deductions, but includes a gradually phasing out exemption. And few other countries, Canada and India, have similar alternative minimum taxes. These taxes have pros and cons. I mean, on the one hand, they improve equity, they can generate additional revenue, but they also increase the complexity of tax filing, reduce the predictability for the individuals of the tax liability, and by disallowing certain deductions, for example, for medical expenses, can create hardship in certain circumstances. There is currently a lot of discussion, including, for instance, in France, on a wealth tax on the super-rich. Because billionaires' wealth has increased exponentially in recent decades. And of course, billionaires pay proportionately much less taxes than the middle income classes because they consume proportionally much less, and they derive most of their wealth from unrealized capital gains, and also they use holding companies to shield their dividends. So a lower rate, the proposal being put forward, for example, by Zuckman, is for a low rate minimum annual tax on their wealth, which certainly would generate significant revenues and improve vertical equity. Also, such a tax, if it was levied at, let's say, 2% a year or something like that, would be considerably less than the average return on the wealth that these individuals typically obtain. And so its efficiency and incentive costs would be probably relatively low. But it presents very significant implementation challenges, because it would only work if it was agreed by most countries that have significant financial centers to prevent tax-driven migration and competition. And of course, the main obstacle is a political nature, because super rich hold a lot of influence on policymakers everywhere. So let's now talk a little bit about the challenges coming from the digital revolution. The first challenge is e-commerce. Now, e-commerce worldwide is exploded in recent decades. It's now estimated at around 35 trillion US dollars, and is projected to double by 2030. This year, it is estimated that almost 3 billion people will shop online. So, and nearly 1/3 of e-commerce takes place across borders. So already, not most, but many countries are subjecting e-sales, including the cross-border ones, to the VAT or GST. And this is, of course, crucial to ensure a level playing field and unfair competition with domestic sellers. Much progress has been made in recent decades in enforcing the VAT on e-commerce, but the main challenge remains with respect to cross-border sales of digital services. What the OECD does is recommends that countries require the foreign companies that sell goods and services in their country to register and report to the tax administration for tax purposes, preferably in a simplified format to reduce compliance costs for companies that are operating in many countries. The new challenge now is the taxation of crypto assets. The use of crypto assets has escalated in recent decades. Their current market value of their stock is estimated at around $4 trillion, but it has experienced, of course, high volatility because these assets are very volatile in prices. More than 400 million people are thought to use them, but the ownership, of course, is quite concentrated. And the stable coins, that is the crypto assets that maintain a stable value vis-a-vis a fiat currency, for example, typical the US dollars, are emerging as their fastest growing category. And their current stock is estimated at over US 280 billion, and is expected to increase a lot, particularly as after the US sort of, with the Genius Act, is promoting this initiative. We could discuss in great detail much more why are they doing so, but let's leave that aside. The regulatory frameworks for crypto assets are lagging behind their rapid technological advances. And so far, the focus of the regulation has been mainly on containing the use for illegal activities, such as money laundering, and also to reduce financial stability risks. But crypto assets also pose significant challenges for tax policy and administration. Okay. There are design issues arise from the fact that crypto assets have a dual nature of investment vehicles and means of payment. Most countries treat the crypto assets, including the stable coins, as property, so they subject their transaction to capital gains tax or to the income tax. And this creates burdens for small users that have to keep tabs on their transaction and the value in each transaction, and also discourages their use as a means of payment. As regards the acquisition, the value-added tax, the acquisition of cryptocurrencies for use as a fiat money is generally either exempt or considered out of scope for VAT purposes. And revenues and fees of crypto miners should be subject to VAT, but they're often exempted, leading to distortions. Now, there are some countries have begun, for example, in Kazakhstan, levying a targeted levy on the proof-of-work miners to price the externality that is created by their high use of energy. This table shows how the tax in various countries, how various countries tax in principle, the use of crypto assets. But the main challenges for taxation of crypto assets relates not to tax policy, but to tax administration, because the anonymity facilitates and encourages tax evasion, and there is obvious evidence of underreporting of crypto holdings and transactions. The use of crypto can undermine the VAT system by facilitating underreporting of the final sales and increasing the risk of fraud, for example, of carousel-type fraud. Efforts to improve compliance have focused on establishing reporting requirements for the providers of crypto services. And I look forward to hearing the experiences of the countries in the subsequent panel on this. This is, of course, easier when the crypto exchanges are centralized, but the taxing them can encourage migration to decentralized and to peer-to-peer exchanges of the crypto assets. What is fundamental, of course, is international cooperation through automatic exchange of information on crypto holdings and transactions among tax administration to avoid cross-border regulatory and enforcement arbitrage. The OECD in 2022 has put forward a new reporting framework for crypto assets, the so-called CARF, which to date has been adopted by 69 jurisdictions and is slated to start being implemented actually in 2026. Okay. So the final aspect that I would like to discuss is the future of labor taxation. Of course, it's clear that the aging population and also the increasing barriers to migration will continue to affect negatively, probably at an accelerating rate over the longer term, the base of labor taxation. So both the income tax and the social security contribution. Moreover, forms of work different from the traditional employment, for example, contract, platform, self-employment, are rising worldwide. And this reflects, of course, a number of institutional, economic, and even cultural factors. But taxation-related factors also play a role because self-employed workers in a number of countries can benefit from lower social security and unemployment contributions, more generous deduction under the personal income tax, and the ability to reclassify their labor income as capital income, especially when they are incorporated. So the OECD has documented in a paper of a couple of years ago significant differences in the labor tax wedge, that is the difference between the total cost of a worker to the employer and its take-home pay for different forms of employment among its member countries. These differences, of course, violate the principle of tax neutrality and then can create incentives for both firms and individuals to choose non-traditional forms of work or to misclassify the form of employment. This, in turn, can have adverse consequences for income tax and for social security revenues, and aggravated by the fact that the taxes on the self-employed are notoriously easier to avoid and to evade. At the same time, non-traditional workers also enjoy less social protection because unemployment, pension, and healthcare benefits, in some cases, can be less generous for them, and because they have less continuous and less well-documented work history, which can make it more difficult to satisfy eligibility criteria for those benefits. So this creates then a pressure to increase their protection. And but the important challenge that is on the horizon is that posed by automation, but particularly by artificial intelligence. of automation, in particular the adoption of Gen AI, generative artificial intelligence, hold the promise to improve a lot productivity and potential growth, but they can create also substantial challenges for the labor market and for labor taxation by substituting workers. Given the very rapid speed of innovation in this area, it is really impossible to predict at this point how the balance of these effects, the effects on productivity and growth and the effects of displacement of workers will evolve over the medium to long term. The current available evidence suggests that while traditional automation, that is the substitution of workers by robots, mainly affected lower skilled and lower wages workers, AI poses threats mainly to higher skilled workers, especially in entry-level occupations that can, when the task can be more efficiently performed by artificial intelligence. To the extent so that automation and the use of AI have a negative effect on employment, they of course erode the main base of the personal income tax and the social security contribution. And at the same time, they put upward pressure on public spending for the social protection of the workers that are displaced, for the need for active labor market policies to train and redeploy them, and for changes in education policies and the tools and in school curricula to adapt them to changing skill requirements. So this makes all the more important the efforts to strengthen the taxation of capital and of real property, and to consider other tax sources, such as the green taxes, which of course at the moment in some parts of this world are very unpopular. On the other hand, by vastly expanding the access of tax administration to relevant information, the use of AI can also improve tax enforcement. I look forward to hearing some of that in the subsequent panel, and may even facilitate the introduction of innovations in tax design, such as personal progressive income tax and the enforcement of property taxes. The question is, should the automation itself be taxed? And this is a very complicated question, both in theory and practice, because there is obviously a trade-off between two competing objectives. On the one hand, avoiding the excessive disruption in labor markets, shoring up tax revenue, but on the other hand, safeguarding incentives to innovation. One possibility is to levy a carbon-type taxes on the huge consumption of electricity by tech firms. I think this is going to be covered in one of the panels to come. And, but the main point is that there are many practical difficulties in designing and administering taxes on the use of robots or of AI. In any event, the competition for leadership in AI is really now driven mainly by geopolitical objectives. And large countries or regional blocs are subsidizing rather than taxing the development of AI. So at least for the time being, it does not look very likely that AI can be taxed. So let me conclude with a few sort of reflections. So basically, more revenues are needed in most countries, but the current global trends create significant obstacles to this aim. And the combined impact of increased capital mobility internationally and the breakneck speed of technological advances has contributed and continues to contribute to an excessive concentration of income and wealth and to the erosion of the traditional tax bases. And this, of course, reinforces social and geopolitical tensions worldwide. International cooperation is, of course, crucial to ensure transparency, avoid tax and regulatory races to the bottom, tap potential new revenue sources like green taxes or potentially in the future in automation tax. But unfortunately, it's proving elusive. I don't have to explain that. What can be done? I think that I don't want to sound naive, because being optimistic at this point risks being naive. But I believe that there is scope in this multipolar world for coalition of the willing. That is, for countries that have that share similar objectives to get together and work together. And such coalition of the willing can support efforts by the multilateral institution to improve transparency, to curb excessive tax competition, and to bring crypto assets into the tax net. Countries can also learn from best international practices in tax design to adapt their tax system to the global challenges that I discussed, and others that will be discussed in other panels of this. And they can also strive to harness the potential of artificial intelligence to strengthen their tax administration and enforcement. There is also, more broadly, a need to rethink the scope and the financing, the coverage and the financing of the social security to adjust to the evolving nature of the labor market. And events like this forum, where challenges and options are debated in a technical and non-partisan way, a rare commodity these days, can make a really useful contribution towards these goals. So I look forward to the next panels to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muito obrigada, professora Teresa Ter-Minassian, por essa elucidativa e desafiadora exposição. Acho que todos nós aprendemos muito e também estamos curiosos com a perspectiva de desenvolvimento no futuro. E agora ouviremos a doutora Helena Borges para os seus comentários.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Ministro, e queria começar as minhas palavras, primeiro por agradecer a oportunidade, uma vez que eu não fazia parte deste painel, o convite que me foi dirigido para aqui estar. E depois, primeiro, cumprimentar a Sra. Professora Teresa Ter-Minassian pela clareza e pela profundidade da intervenção com que nos, enfim, brindou. E depois confessar algo em termos pessoais, pronto, que é uma enorme honra e um privilégio este convite que me foi dirigido para comentar a sua intervenção. E é ainda mais assim porque, pronto, primeiro porque a professora Teresa Ter-Minassian conhece e teve um relevante papel em momentos difíceis da economia portuguesa, em que estivemos com problemas, enfim, de desequilíbrios económicos ou financeiros, e enfim, a forma como também conduziu os trabalhos, como nos guiou, como nos marcou, até do ponto de vista da cultura, de rigor na forma como gerimos no plano económico ou financeiro Portugal, é também ainda hoje, com certeza, algo de que muito beneficiamos como país, mas de que eu beneficiei muito ao longo da vida pessoal como profissional e hoje como responsável, e portanto era sempre alguém a quem eu estava atenta ao que dizia e ao que escrevia, e portanto nunca calculei ter o privilégio primeiro de estar, pronto, de poder comentar as suas palavras, e acho que isso é também algo que eu queria muito sublinhar com humildade, que quem está com as responsabilidades que eu tenho deve ter, estar sempre atento e capaz de beneficiar de cada uma das oportunidades de aprendizagem e de ficar mais apto para compreender a realidade onde tem de tomar decisões todos os dias. Depois, dizer-lhe que em Portugal, talvez agora, depois de dizer o que é que ganhamos ou o que é que aprendemos também com os seus ensinamentos, para além depois um comentário sobre a intervenção. Eu acho que Portugal e talvez o contributo da administração tributária em Portugal nos últimos 10 anos, onde eu tenho tido responsabilidades como diretora-geral, nós diria assim, nós temos tido sempre um crescimento da receita superior, bastante superior ao crescimento do produto interno bruto, o que é também revelador da forma como temos adaptado o nosso sistema fiscal e de como temos tido uma administração capaz de implementar esse sistema fiscal com equilíbrio e com a capacidade de manter os cidadãos, enfim, com um nível de aceitação e de cumprimento muitíssimo elevado, e é algo que hoje também muito nos orgulhamos. Portanto, creio que esse é a melhor leitura que podemos fazer de que aprendemos com as nossas dificuldades. É sempre em tempos de crise que, enfim, as grandes decisões se tomam, mas depois é muito importante que, com o passar do tempo, não nos afastemos desses ensinamentos. E acho que isso é revelador da situação económica ou financeira em Portugal nos dias de hoje, em que nos últimos anos houve, enfim, até superávites. Portanto, o que é bastante sintomático. E essa é talvez uma leitura no plano mais macroeconómico, mas no plano daquilo que é o funcionamento do sistema fiscal em Portugal, eu acho que nós temos tido sempre uma preocupação, não apenas de ter um sistema fiscal competitivo para atrair investimento e atrair pessoas que queiram investir e viver em Portugal, mas que sintam que o sistema fiscal se alcança com um nível de conflitualidade reduzido, com os tribunais naturalmente centrados naquilo que é que são os litígios que são devidos, mas com um nível reduzido, cada vez mais reduzido, de necessidade de recorrermos aos tribunais para assegurar a cobrança e a justiça, embora haja sempre margem para aperfeiçoamento, mas é algo que também nos orgulhamos que a receita se está a alcançar com uma convergência também na redução da conflitualidade, porque hoje sabemos que para os sistemas fiscais são competitivos, não apenas nas taxas ou naquilo que são as comparações da fiscalidade, mas sobretudo se nós sabemos atrair investimento e conservá-lo, no qual a fiscalidade é cada vez mais internacional, como aliás resultou da intervenção que fez, hoje é num quadro de cooperação internacional, quer seja no âmbito daquilo que são as nossas obrigações como membro da União Europeia, quer como membro da OCDE, quer na cooperação multilateral e na convergência para aquilo que são as soluções, digamos, harmonizadas e que evitem uma competição negativa com impactos na economia, que Portugal está muitíssimo empenhado e, portanto, em continuar a ser aquele país que atrai os investimentos e que tem a capacidade de os manter, porque sabe recorrer àquilo que são hoje também as recomendações da OCDE no âmbito dos procedimentos amigáveis e resolver os conflitos pela via daquilo que são o respeito pelaquilo que são os acordos para a eliminação da dupla tributação internacional, pela uma rigorosa e tanto quanto possível abrangente aplicação dos mecanismos de preços de transferência e, com isso, evitar realmente os conflitos entre jurisdições que normalmente são um fator de dificuldade para os investidores, para os cidadãos que se movimentam hoje um pouco por todo o mundo. E, portanto, se hoje temos, enfim, quase que estamos, enfim, a convergir para dois grupos muito diferentes de contribuintes, de cidadãos, de empresas, aqueles que esperam pagar os seus impostos sem nenhuma intervenção, quase que seamless. Portanto, uma fiscalidade que é invisível, que se alcança a receita sem a necessidade de intervenção dos cidadãos, em que a utilização dos dados, a informação da administração, não apenas pré-preenche, calcula e assegura que a tributação se alcance sem grandes, enfim, intervenção humana. Claro que há sempre a intervenção humana no tratamento da informação e as administrações têm de continuar a investir nos seus profissionais para conseguirem, no fundo, desenhar sistemas de compliance by design, no sentido de fazer com que se previna quase que nunca será em absoluto o incumprimento, porque há sempre franjas do planeamento fiscal onde isso não pode acontecer, mas verdadeiramente o grande universo dos contribuintes são cumpridores e é nesse sentido que temos de continuar a guiar-nos. E depois há uma outra realidade que é cada vez mais emergente e expressiva, que é a complexidade das relações tributárias, com, enfim, abrangência em diferentes áreas de jurisdição, com realidades cada vez mais complexas, porque a economia assim está enfim, a transformar-se, e com os sistemas fiscais a procurarem cobrir essa realidade e a exigir também aí um nível de especialização, ou seja, dos profissionais das autoridades tributárias e dos diferentes parceiros, das academias que formam os profissionais, dos intermediários, quer sejam advogados, quer sejam contabilistas, quer sejam consultores, que são absolutamente essenciais como parceiros das administrações tributárias para a sua implementação. E, portanto, é isso que verdadeiramente hoje nos desafia, é estarmos à altura de nos mantermos na vanguarda da adoção de soluções que sejam capazes de acompanhar as transformações que se operam na economia, não apenas no desenho da legislação, que já não é a legislação que desenhava no passado, porque ela tem que ser aplicada com tecnologia, e não é o mesmo legislar para aplicar com tecnologia do que legislar para administrações que aplicavam os processos de tributação em formato de papel. Portanto, há transformações substanciais a acontecerem no ambiente que nos desafiam todos. Mas é por isso que estes fóruns, onde temos também a oportunidade de encontrar os diferentes parceiros, as diferentes perspectivas, nos melhoram, não é? Nos deixam atentos aspectos que não faziam parte das nossas prioridades e que no final destas sessões sempre saímos mais aptos para lidar com a realidade. Portanto, aquilo que a senhora professora de alguma forma aqui hoje nos mostrou, pronto, foi enfim, as grandes tendências por onde nos devemos orientar, não é? Todos. E, portanto, que as escolhas se façam também, tendo bem presente esta apresentação que aqui nos fez, é algo verdadeiramente fundamental e útil, e beneficiarmos dessa sua reflexão que acompanhou a história da fiscalidade e, pronto, também nos guiámos, é algo que, pronto, que só podemos estar-lhe muitíssimo gratos pela intervenção de fundo que aqui hoje realizou. Muito obrigada.
Algum comentário?
Não. Bom, concordo completamente com o que a doutora Helena disse. Primeiro, agradeço a sua lembrança do meu trabalho com Portugal, que foi já bastante anos atrás, no princípio dos anos 83, exatamente, um período antes da entrada de Portugal na União Europeia. E eu acho que o programa que fizemos facilitou, que foi muito bem sucedido, eu acho.
Eu comecei a trabalhar na Autoridade Tributária Aduaneira em 1982 e, portanto, a senhora professora teve uma intervenção na economia portuguesa em 83 e daí as minhas...
Isso me dá também. Mas é verdade. Não, mas eu concordo também muito em que você disse que as mudanças, digamos, tecnológicas na administração tributária têm que ter ir juntas com adaptações da política tributária. E, neste sentido, eu acho que Portugal ainda pode fazer algumas melhor. Também no imposto, por exemplo, corporativo, porque verdadeiramente a característica que vocês têm de taxas progressivas, efetiva progressiva, tem efeito, eu acho, de incentivo negativos no investimento. Mas, bom, é outra discussão que podemos ter. Não, mas eu cumprimento muito a atuação que o Portugal tem tido nos últimos anos em melhorar as suas finanças públicas, principalmente do lado da receita, mas também em alguns aspectos do lado da despesa. Se tem que continuar o esforço, porque o nível da dívida de Portugal ainda continua bastante elevado. Quizá por mais ênfase em racionalizar o sistema tributário para facilitar o crescimento e, do lado, na sua responsabilidade dos gastos, para conseguir melhoras de eficiência e reduzir, digamos, e conter mais as pressões inevitáveis que vão continuar com consequência, por exemplo, do envelhecimento da população e a necessidade de contribuir ao aumento das despesas de defesa, etc.
Deixe-me só fazer um comentário brevíssimo. Portanto, primeiro, evidentemente, que há aqui aspectos onde a autoridade tributária executa e há aspectos de política fiscal que são decisões dos governos, mas ainda assim, eu creio que, enfim, para contextualizar, eu acho que nos últimos anos o que nós temos, e em particular nos últimos governos, tem havido um movimento de redução da tributação, que aliás foi falado com logo pelo Sr. Presidente do FIBE, portanto, reduzindo as taxas e, portanto, estamos a fazer um movimento de convergência gradual sem que isso tenha provocado redução da receita, que é uma coisa também importante. Portanto, nos últimos anos o que temos verificado é uma tendência para reduzir os níveis de tributação do rendimento, alguma, enfim, preocupação em torno da tributação do consumo para ter sob controle o nível da receita, uma vez que também há grande acréscimo do comércio eletrónico, mas simultaneamente ir fazendo este ajustamento gradual para que não haja desequilíbrios ou uma redução da receita que depois comprometesse os níveis de convergência que também têm sido alcançados na redução da despesa, da dívida pública, que tem sido consistentemente reduzida nos últimos tempos e tem sido uma preocupação de Portugal que, pronto, manter a redução dos impostos, a redução da dívida pública e o aumento da receita é uma equação quase impossível, mas que tem sido alcançada e, portanto, aí penso que a administração tributária e, naturalmente, também a economia em geral e os níveis de cumprimento das empresas e dos contribuintes em Portugal tem sido um movimento harmonioso de comprometimento com estas nossas obrigações coletivas e, portanto, também lhe agradeço, enfim, a leitura que faz acerca do que observa em Portugal, para que nós também tenhamos um olhar exterior, porque às vezes quando olhamos para nós próprios não vemos nem todas as nossas imperfeições, outras vezes vemos mais imperfeições ainda do que os outros veem, porque temos a obrigação de o fazer, nem sempre exteriorizamos, mas sobretudo estar atento ao que se percepciona de fora é uma obrigação de quem tem que tomar decisões e por isso fico-lhe muito grata também pela forma como pela leitura da nossa própria realidade que aqui expressou.
Parabéns.
Muito obrigada.
Que continue esse bom trabalho.
Bem, chegamos ao fim desse painel de abertura e acho que abrimos com chave de ouro, como se diz. Tivemos a oportunidade não só dessa belíssima exposição da professora Teresa Ter-Minassian, mas também esse diálogo extremamente profícuo, como nós vimos, falando sobre a administração tributária e as suas complexidades, que é uma contribuição da doutora Helena Borges. Está encerrado este painel, vamos seguir o outro. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.